Diversity is a huge piece of what we're able to do here because you mentioned food therapy, and this is in a way what we're doing with these because you're getting the probiotics from the food and the wide diversity that they bring rather than going into a lab and selecting 10, 12, whatever strains that you want, which then will be routinely fed over time. The other cool thing about this is that it's wide diversity, but lower potency than you would find in a traditional probiotic supplement. And we usually think more is better, right? But more is not always better. Because if you think about us or our pets, what we really want to be doing is eating a wide variety of food. And that's how we really help our microbiome.
Whether your pet is struggling with gut issues, itchy skin, or chronic inflammation, or they're already doing well and you want to keep them that way, today's episode is packed with some powerful insights that can benefit every stage of your pet's wellness journey. Now, if you've tried probiotics before and felt underwhelmed with the results, or if you're just not sure which ones actually work, you're going to love this conversation. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Dr. Katie Woodley, holistic vet and founder of The Natural Pet Doctor. And today I'm joined by two amazing guests from a brand I've trusted for years. Kelley, Marian, the founder of Green Juju, and Billy Hoekman, their VP of Nutrition and Communication. And we're diving deep into how they've actually created probiotics derived from kombucha, raw milk, and leafy greens that can transform your pet's gut even if they're sensitive to those foods. So these aren't your typical capsules or lab-grown strains. They're whole food derived, incredibly diverse, and they support not just healing, but long-term vitality. We're going to be covering how they're made, what makes them different from the standard synthetic strains, and what to look out for when adding probiotics to your pet's healing plan. Let's get into it. Want to know exactly which probiotics actually support your pet's gut, not just mask symptoms? Make sure you grab our free probiotic guide for the pets in the link below. It's a must-have resource for every pet parent dealing with gut or skin issues. I hope you enjoy it. Billy, Kelley, it's such a pleasure to have you here with me today. I know we're going to be diving deep into some of your newer products around the probiotics and why they're so different and how food really can be medicine. I'd love to hear more about Kelley, especially your story and how you created Green Juju. And then, of course, I'd love to hear from Billy because I know he's like the mad scientist in the kitchen brewing up a lot of this stuff too. But Kelley, tell us a little bit about kind of how Green Juju came to be.
Green Juju came to be over 10 years ago. I had a yellow lab who I got when I was 19, and we were very, very bonded. And she got a very rare joint tumor. And we went to oncologists, lots of different vets, holistic vets. Everybody basically said the same thing. We don't have a lot of research on this type of cancer, and we know that chemo and radiation do not work, and amputation is really your only option, which is tough to hear, right? And she was really not doing well at the time. She had ear infections and yeast infections and bladder infections, everything. And I was just like, I can't put you through a major surgery right now. I just intuitively felt like this isn't going to go well. So all of the vets that we spoke to said that this is a locally aggressive but slow to spread cancer. It was a synovial cell sarcoma. And so they said, you have time on your side. If you want to experiment with some things, go ahead. And at that point, I was sure that I wouldn't go through with the amputation. And so I started experimenting with diet. And I have an autoimmune condition myself, and I had been trading out whatever I was eating before for whole foods and learning about how different foods can help me with inflammation and detoxification. And I really just started applying what I was doing to myself to the dog. And she got a version of the juice that I was making that had bone broth and coconut oil for the various things I was trying to support her with. So in that time, we changed to a raw diet. We were doing Chinese herbs. We were doing acupuncture and different energy work and basically everything we could think of. And they gave her 3 to 7 months. And after 14 months, she had clear eyes, a clear coat, no more allergies. She was just full of life, but still had this tumor. So we went through with the amputation. She lived from time of diagnosis, she lived for 4.5 years. She had the normal, almost 14-year lifespan of a lab, and she literally never slowed down. So while I was doing that, I had a dog walking business and everybody knew what was going on with Bailey. And they were like, well, what are you going to do? I was like, well, I'm making this green stuff. I was like, I know why I'm doing it for her. I know it's safe. I don't know what it would do for anybody else, but you can try it. So I started picking up dogs for the park and putting this green stuff in their freezer. And people started saying that their dogs had more energy, they were shedding less, they had less eye boogers, they weren't eating poop, like all these different things, which led me to think, what is this doing? Because 10 years ago, people literally laughed at me for talking about feeding plants to dogs. And so it got me looking into what are plants doing? How is the fiber supporting their gut? Like, how are the antioxidants and phytonutrients supporting their body? So it really just was extremely empowering to be, wow, I can actually help my dog by what I put in her bowl. So it was really never meant to be a company, but it just became one off of this. And local pet stores started calling, and one tricked me into selling them, and Billy tricked us into being our first customer. And yeah, it just turned into this thing of, wow, what can we do when we put in their bowl? And I had two very sensitive dogs, which led the company to be all about novel proteins and less ingredients. And if my dog can have it, pretty much any dog can have it. And that's how we started.
I love it. And it's so similar to so many of our stories, right? When we find this different way of feeding pets versus the conventional way.
Mhm.
And as you saw, gaining more quality life and years with your Bailey is just incredible. And now I know your products we use all the time and with my clients, and we see such amazing results. And I love that you have limited ingredient, but fully balanced products too, because I work with so many sensitive pets. So thanks, Kelley. Now,
Well, thank you.
Billy, let's hear your story. How did you find Kelley for one, and kind of what's your role with Green Juju?
Well, I think that, that's the first distinction to make there is that I found Kelley. When I was leaving my last job, I wanted to work for her specifically. I sought her out and flew to her and said, I want to work for you. So, and within that, I sort of saw one, the ethics that she's always had. I saw the creativity there, the innovation that she'd always done since the very beginning. And it's a small company, and I felt like we could really do some cool things together. We could kind of like work that magic that you can have without investors and things like boards and things like that. And so I thought it was a really, really good opportunity because I think more than anything, what I really pride myself on, outside of just like, I don't know, general nutrition knowledge or whatever, is just being creative within the space. I really, that's my favorite thing, is like not just established knowledge, but is like, how do we create something new? How do we create better health outcomes, new things that haven't been done before? And so, having, been in a formulation role for a long time, I just thought it was a really good mix. And since joining, it's been really great because we can just kind of like freestyle these ideas. And I get, I would say outside of the things that Kelley and I come up with for Green Juju, my hobby is like making stuff for my own dog. So I feel like I come to her with some ideas and she's like, that's ridiculous. But then some of them make it through. Uh, and for that reason, I think it's been really, really good because I think we think similarly in a lot of ways. And so I will have been with Green Juju for 4 years in June. And
Wow.
just like these with these new probiotics, I feel like every year I've been here, we've been like, okay, we have these established products. Let's take some time to just worry about those, not develop some new products, and then we get ideas, and here we are. So I feel like that's kind of the case. But I've actually known Kelley for over 10 years. And as you mentioned,
Wow.
I was the first Green Juju customer. So I wear that with a badge of honor because I was not supposed to be, but here I am.
Aw.
And so, yeah, that's pretty much me.
I love it. You guys are awesome. So just knowing both of you personally and the products you make, the difference you make. So that's wonderful. Now, you've just come out with some really awesome different types of probiotics from the norm. So I'd love to just kind of talk about a little bit before we dive into the different like formulas, because there's three of them. I'd love for you to walk through how they're made, what makes them truly food based too. So, like, really looking at food as medicine, because a lot of people get worried about probiotics and side effects, or if it's coming from a food, is it going to impact my pet if they have sensitivity? So, let's just talk first about how you actually made these products.
Yeah, so I think those are all really good questions because it is hard to initially understand. Like it's food based, but there's no food.
Mm.
And so I totally understand that when we started describing these on like training videos we were trying to make, we were like, how do we explain this to people? So it was a real process because this is something that's never been done before in human or pet nutrition. And I quite honestly, and maybe Kelley does, I'm not sure, but I don't even remember where the idea came from initially for for that, but it's here and here we are. So the process that we make in these, so we take three really great fermented foods. And the first thing that I'm really proud of with this is it's cultures, and we can get more into this, I guess, but it's cultures from me and Kelley. So it's like personally from our lives. And it's like, this is kind of going to sound corny, but it's like our gift to animals because of the fact that it's like these developed cultures and products. But what we do is we take uh, fermented raw milk. We take kombucha and we take Bailey's blend or dark leafy greens. We ferment them to make these wonderful fermented foods. And fermented foods, unlike traditional probiotics, have a bunch of different species of probiotics. So, like if you were to look at a normal probiotic label, you might have like 5 different strains of probiotics, or 6 or 15 or whatever. But if you're thinking about, say, fermented vegetables, you're going to have over 500 different species. And that's what nature does as far as like beneficial bacteria. So our thought was, how do we recreate that in a new way, in a convenient way, but also in a concentrated way. So what we do is we grow those cultures, then we have a lab take those foods, we have them take just the probiotics out of those foods and grow them separately. So in a completely different medium. So what you get there is just the cultures, just the um, probiotics and healthy yeast, and none of the food. But you still have those hundreds of cultures because we're growing out the entire bit of those cultures every time.
Mm. So you have a lot of variety, and what's nice is you don't have any like proteins. So a lot of pets, are sensitive to certain proteins. And then also too, you're not getting, like you mentioned, Billy, any of the food products. So like pets who are worried about like milk, because I could hear, a lot of my clients being like, no, my pet's sensitive to milk. Why would I use milk? Well, there's no actual dairy particles that are part of that product, correct? Like there's no dairy in this probiotic.
Correct. So one of the ways we talk about it is that we select our foods and then we strain the probiotics from the foods. So we're separating them. So it's separated from the food. So that's one of the beauties of this, is that it takes all of those sensitivity concerns away from it. So you can get the benefits of the raw milk without actually feeding the raw milk, or from kombucha, or from the dark leafy greens. And that's, I think, going in line with the whole company and the sensitivity piece, and always trying to cater to the sensitive dogs. This will give them an opportunity to have so many foods and so many probiotic benefits that they couldn't otherwise have.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I get asked this because I work with a lot of cats also, so I'm going to throw this in there. Can we also use this with cats?
100%.
Okay. I
Yeah.
knew that, but I just wanted to clarify. So,
And
um,
it doesn't have a lot of taste or odor, and the serving sizes are pretty small, so it should be pretty easy to get in there too.
wonderful. That's
Um,
fantastic.
and I did want to mention too, because so I've been doing stuff with Rita Hogan recently, and her new book, and just learning more and more about energetics, and there's Kelley kind of makes fun of me because I'm all just numbers and amino acids and et cetera. But learning more about this, I had this like moment when I was with Rita, and I was like, oh, this is perfect because there are animals who goat milk is a warming food. So there are animals that need cooling foods. Now you can get the probiotic benefit, and there is no warming or cooling assigned to this because it's literally just the probiotic bacteria. So I think that's a really
Yeah.
cool, those people who practice energetics and work with clients in those ways. I think this will be a real groundbreaking thing for that too.
Yeah, no, that's great for like we call it food therapy from Chinese
Mhm.
medicine. So that's great clarification. Now, you touched a little bit on this already of how it's different. And for everyone here, a lot of times we're looking to use probiotics because there's all this microbiome gut health research out there and looking at, we have the microbiome is made up of trillions of different types of microorganisms, bacteria, protozoa, fungi, even yeast. Yeast can be beneficial and are part of that ecosystem that makes up part of the gut health in our pets. And so, as Billy, you mentioned just before, like when we reach for our traditional probiotics, we're relying or thinking that a product with 3 or 5 different types of bacteria is going to change that whole ecosystem. And it's just not possible. And so, let's go a little bit more into like what makes this different, just to remind people from the other probiotics that are currently on the market that they might see in like the pet food stores or online or Chewy or getting also from their veterinarian. Um, so let's go through that a little bit more just so people truly understand what it means.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll do just to give you the difference. I'll give you a specific deep dive on one of them, just in terms of like the probiotic makeup. So there you're talking about 3, 5, whatever the number is, strains. So if you take our product Farm, that is derived from fermented raw dairy, but it's not just derived from any fermented raw dairy. It's derived from my personal fermented raw yogurt culture, which has been alive for like 2.5 years or more, and it's never been over 100 degrees. So now I'll just give you and Kelley's is making fun of me in her mind. So I will just give you the timeline of this, and then that will kind of like I think illustrate the difference really well. So first I took raw milk and then I used like 4 simple yogurt cultures. So there I'm growing out the cultures in the raw milk and the yogurt cultures. Then I added like 3 more different farms that produce raw yogurt so I could get their specific culturing from the farms themselves because there's going to be different stuff in the air. I used a commercial other yogurt starter as well. So now every time I've made yogurt, I have used some of the last batch to re-inoculate the next batch. So that's probably every week for 2 years. So it's a different batch of raw milk. And we know in raw milk that every cow or goat has a different genetic makeup of probiotics because it depends on uh, the the time of year, depends on the temperature of the grass, depends on what they're eating, depends on their genetics, all these things. So every time I did that, we added more variation in those probiotics.
Mm.
So now you just have um, this multitude. So there, according to the studies we looked at, you're going to have over 3,000 different types of probiotics and healthy yeast. And so we took all of those probiotics and bacteria that naturally exist in that setup and then put them in these probiotics. So it really couldn't be more night and day difference. And then every time we grow them in the lab, they're going to have the same bacteria, but they'll grow out in different ways. So this batch will have more of this one. This batch will have more of this one within that batch. So it's really the most convenient way to bring as much diversity as possible.
Mm. I Go ahead, Kelley.
So diversity is a huge piece of what we're able to do here because you mentioned food therapy, and this is in a way what we're doing with these because you're getting the probiotics from the food and the wide diversity that they bring rather than going into a lab and selecting
Yeah.
10, 12, whatever strains that you want, which then will be routinely fed over time. The other cool thing about this is that it's wide diversity, but lower potency than you would find in a traditional probiotic supplement. And we usually think more is better, right? But more is not always better. Because if you think about us or our pets, what we really want to be doing is eating a wide variety of food. And that's how we really help our microbiome. When you're throwing high potency strains on top of something, it can be great if you're targeting a specific thing or a short term or whatever, but it can also be tough on puppies or a pet with a sensitive microbiome, which is usually when we reach for probiotics anyways, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it can be too much. And this approach is great because it's the wide diversity and lower potency. And so it can be a great, almost food therapy way of approaching this.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I was just about to say people will hear there's so many in there. Is that too much for my pet? Are they going to get diarrhea from this or, GI issues? So I love that you brought that up. And it's mimicking, going back to what was said at the beginning, it's mimicking nature. Like it's more natural, like truly natural, not just using the word natural like so many companies throw around. It's actually truly mimicking nature and what's going to be most beneficial to maintain like a healthy balance in the body, especially in the gut, rather than, changing it with, as you mentioned, Kelley, really high concentration probiotics, and we can actually create dysbiosis, which is imbalance in the microbiome, and actually upset and create harm long term, which unfortunately, so many of my clients come to me and they're using the same probiotic strain for like months or years every single day. And that's not how they're meant to be used if we're using those types of supplements. But this is a great alternative that's just more natural and gentle on the body, it sounds like. So that leads to people probably wondering, we've covered it a little bit, is like, what if my pet's sensitive? So, especially, we touched on it already, but let's go back to it just to remind people because it can be scary. Milk, if they're sensitive to kombucha, or if they're sensitive to like leafy greens, or maybe they've tried like Bailey's blend and they're like, my pet didn't do well with that. Should I not use these products? So, let's talk a little bit more about that and remind everyone of kind of how it's made and what's not actually in these things, in these products.
So one thing I wanted to mention, going back to Billy's example with Farm, the fermented dairy-based one, is he mentions that he adds different yogurts in there. So there's goat and there's cow. And
Mm,
I know from my former pet parent life with my dogs, hearing that would have set me off the edge. Well, my dog can have goat, but they can't have cow, so we can't do this, right?
yeah,
But that's what's so cool about how these are made because you're taking the food, straining the probiotics, and then growing the probiotics without the food. So it doesn't matter that it had goat and cow in it. It just matters that you have a wider diversity of strains in there.
yeah,
Um, I'll let you continue on that, Billy, but I like to make that distinction because I know the former me would have been like, nope, I'm not listening anymore. I can't hear it.
yep.
Yeah, and one, I'd like to say I do appreciate that you say milk with an E.
I
So just throwing
do.
that out there. Both of you do that. So you have that in common.
I
No,
I know we both
you
say
might do it
milk.
just a tiny bit, but
Milk. Milk.
Katie, you do it
I
just
do.
straight up.
It's
Um,
okay. I'm proud of
so
it. Milk.
yeah, so no, it's actually, and it serves the product better to have cow and goat because they're going to have different makeups of, various bacteria. It was funny. It is funny for me now that this is going to be a product, and like, because I literally drink this yogurt every morning for breakfast, and so it is weird for me to like see it and be like, oh yeah, this is a thing now that's going to be in people's houses. Um,
Without the yogurt, just for
yeah,
clarification.
exactly right. Without the very, very tangy yogurt. And I do think, kind of moving to the other ones, if you want, we can talk about like where they come from.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think too, just because I get this question all the time, like the fermented foods can set pets off with like skin issues, allergies, gut health problems, and it's a real thing. Like histamine intolerances and stuff like this is very common with sensitive pets. So also too, just going back to there is no milk proteins, there's no fermented foods that are in this. It's the beneficial bacterial strains that are so much variety, diversity, low concentration. So this is why these pets can tolerate this very well because none of those reacting foods are actually present in this product. So I just wanted to say that also too, because people are sensitive to histamine too. If you have an allergic pet, you don't want to create a flare, because flares are not fun. So let's go through each like product, how they're a little bit different, and then also too we'll cover where would people start? Why would you choose one over the other?
Well, I would like to say on your fermentation thing too, that is absolutely true. And I think people are a little bit surprised because of they know I like fermentation,
Mhm.
over the years. But not every animal does. You're absolutely correct. There are so many animals that don't do well with fermentation. It's one of the reasons that Green Juju does so many non-fermented items. And then our part of our business philosophy is like, here's a base of non-fermented items, and here's things you can add if you want to. We're not
Mm,
like forcing you to be like, okay, we're going to ferment everything we do, right?
yeah.
Because there can be drawbacks to that.
I
So
love fermentation, but I want you as the pet parent to be in control of how much and when you use it.
Yeah.
Because I think, and we all have like the bucket, right? Like how much can we tolerate? Is it really, really beneficial at this dose, but way too much at this dose? So
Yeah.
I want that to be a very customizable thing.
Yeah, I love that. Choices are
um,
good. And also individualizing it to your pet is key. And your pet can be at different stages of health. So if they're in a flare, they're going to be more sensitive to things versus when we have like we're doing really well, and we don't have any health symptoms and we're strong and healthy. So it's really important that options are key. Another reason
Mhm.
why I love you guys. So, all right,
Thank you.
Billy.
yeah, no, that's the all the products we make, we design them in like, oh, you can go throughout our line and do whatever you want based on that. So going to so we talked about farm and soil is really really special. I asked Kelley, I was like, could you ever have imagined when you made Bailey's blend that you would one day be fermenting it, extracting the probiotics from it, and then using that as a health tool in the future? So with the other two, it's like we're inoculating with specific things, meaning it's not a wild ferment, right? So if you're making yogurt, you're putting yogurt cultures into something. It's not exactly a wild ferment. But with soil, it is a just a true wild ferment. So when we made this, I essentially just took Bailey's blend. I actually added some salt to it so I could get more of an intense ferment into it and lowered the pH. And so all you're getting is those soil-based bacteria and non-soil-based bacteria that come from nature. So what makes this so special is like all of our animals are removed from nature for the most part, especially cats, going back to your earlier comment, who are inside. Almost all cats are indoor cats, right? And so the ones that are inside all the time, they're completely removed from that. And so, when you look at the literature, you have over 500 different species of these probiotic bacteria in there, and it mimics rolling in the grass and eating dirt and all the things that we know that the longest lived animals did. And the things that we're truly missing, even in the human world, we know that kids who grow up on farms and are in the dirt all the time have less allergies, better immune systems, etc. And so what I like about this is like I went on and on about how like, oh, this is the culture I created with the first one, but this is nature's culture. This is like I don't know if anyone can do better than that, right? This is because we're mimicking sort of like the evolutionary environment. And so and I also just think it's cool because having taken something that Kelley made so long ago, and then using it in a different kind of cool way, um, is really meaningful to me as well.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that's really neat. So where would you use the soil product? Like what is this like best for? Is this the one you start with for pets or where would you say you would use soil or make a recommendation for it?
I think soil would be your go-to. It would be the general maintenance. I cannot wait to get my hands on it for my puppy. Great for puppies. Also, it's probably the one I would reach for in times of like GI distress, like
Mhm.
something's off. Um, it's kind of all of them are going to be best in rotation. They all have a place, and luckily with the since we don't have to worry about sensitivities, every pet should be able to handle the rotation, which will be ideal. But I would say this is kind of the baseline intro product puppy.
Awesome.
yeah. Um, and I think you bring up a really good point there, which is like you can stack things, you can build diversity, and you
Yeah.
can still do other things. So let's say one of the ways that I've used this, because obviously there was like testing and I've used it for my own dog. One of the ways I used it, and specifically soil when I was using it, was like I had that as the base of diversity, but then also I still add other fermented foods, things on a daily basis, right? I might do a mushroom probiotic or whatever it might be, and you can combine those things as well. But I like using these as like a baseline for that like general diversity. And soil is going to be really amazing for that. I honestly, I think you can do a lot of cool stuff especially if you have a puppy. I mean, you can, let's say you live in the city. This is just off the top of my head. I'm just throwing this out there. But let's say you live in the city, your dog is not outside very much, and you wanted to use soil and farm. There you would have like the baseline of those bacteria they'd get if they were in the forest every day. And you would get the immunity, the immune system building bacteria of raw milk just in general. So I think like you could even use these in different like life stages in different ways, right? Even if you're not rotating through them. And then the third product we have is called Leaf, which references tea because it's kombucha and kombucha is fermented tea. And I'm going to go back into nerd world here. The kombucha we're using here is my personal SCOBY, of which I had pomegranate kombucha last night, which has been alive for over 10 years. It's actually lived in LA, Philadelphia, and Lancaster was
Well
where
traveled.
it's a well-traveled SCOBY, and that it's hopefully will be in Lancaster forever now. But so within those 10 years, I've used countless like friends and mentor SCOBYs, meaning I've added in their kombucha culture in there. I've used different commercial blends. I've used local farmers in Pennsylvania, their kombucha SCOBYs. So I've been constantly over the years combining and making this like sort of, I don't know, like super SCOBY, if you will, when it comes to like the cultures themselves. And so the reason why we would do that is, again, not only do we know that it's just going to have, and I'll go over in a second what those are, but not only do we know that they're going to have that baseline of all these different hundreds of cultures, but the more, because this is never going over, room temperature essentially, the more we can get in from different sources, the more beneficial, because those are going to pick up things in the air. They're going to pick up, wherever those things were happening. And kombucha has 300 plus different probiotic and healthy yeast strains. And of those, there's been 180 identified species of yeast. And so when we took the entire culture, and I think this is really interesting as well with both farm and because we knew there was going to be inherent yeast in farm and leaf, the lab actually took the culture and put it into one environment that was more conducive to bacteria and grew that out to the probiotics. And then they took it and put it in an environment that was more conducive to yeast and separately grew that out. So you actually get a 50-50 split of those. And what I love about this is when your animal has a yeast issue, it's one yeast that's overgrowing. And so this is based on the idea that you're going to balance out the yeast through inoculation of a bunch of different species. So all those yeast species work in concert with each other. And so the body only has a certain amount of room for yeast. And so if you use this probiotic, you want to outcompete those yeast essentially. And then you also get the probiotic benefits as well. One of the really cool things I realized when me and Antoine, who's our, I always call him the third. We're a triangle at Green Juju, and he's the third point for Green Juju. But I was talking to him about because he's always like, explain this to me in this way because he's a business guy. And we were going over talking about kombucha, and I was like, oh, well, let me just do the numbers here. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So if you take that little 30-gram bottle, that's going to actually have as many probiotic cultures as a gallon and a half of kombucha. And so the other cool thing about this and other things is it's like nature concentrated. So you get this little tiny scoop and you're getting that same probiotic and yeast culture, but it's, in a half-gram serving versus, you're not going to feed your animal 5 ounces of kombucha. So, and then you also, again, don't get any of um, the fermentation. You don't have to deal with, having an issue with histamine, any of that stuff.
Want to know exactly which probiotics actually support your pet's gut, not just mask symptoms? Make sure you grab our free probiotic guide for the pets in the link below. It's a must-have resource for every pet parent dealing with gut or skin issues. I hope you enjoy it.
So, Billy, if somebody has a yeasty pet, which can be really challenging to deal with, how is this the right product to use for that? Because I know it would be hard for me to reach for something that says yeast on it when I'm dealing with yeast.
Well, yeah, there's definitely a couple, like if you look at like the world of helping fix dogs with yeast, there are multiple ways to get there, right? There's starving it out completely. But this is the method of balancing yeast in the body and knowing that it's always going to be there, but you want there to be the right balance of those yeast that naturally exist. So it's essentially if you had a little here, maybe this is a good way to explain it, right? If you had a little slide under a microscope and you had one type of yeast in there, and then you just kept adding balanced yeast, it would eventually out compete that yeast. They would all turn into balance. And so that's what we're trying to do in the body, is to balance that out versus being like yeast is bad. And I will say, there are all those different methods, and we've seen really positive results with those methods. But I think this too, even if you were to go to, oh, I'm going to use just, here's another example. I'm going to use just the Green Juju diet because it's basically no carbohydrates, because the only plants in it are essentially all fiber. So we actually had a dog on our feeding trial with chronic yeast issues. And 3 months into the feeding trial, it actually fixed this dog's yeast issues for one. Like, this had never been a thing throughout its entire life. It was a small French bulldog. And that was the starve out method.
Yeah.
But even in those cases, what I would recommend is once you fix the yeast, then start using leaf so you can establish that balanced yeast, which we know is going to be healthier, and then you could kind of use that moving forward. So I think it could be used in both cases.
That was
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important too, because, a lot of times when we hear about, because I was thinking, I was going to ask the same question, Kelley. People are terrified of seeing yeast. And there's beneficial yeast, and then there's overgrowth of yeast. Doesn't mean that yeast is potentially like bad. And the way we look at it from like a science perspective is a lot of us think about like we attack overgrowth of like bacteria or yeast with like antibiotics or antifungals. And that's approaching health from what's called a germ theory perspective, where we've got to like just wipe out everything. And this is the problem with like using metronidazole, is like we have diarrhea, we use metronidazole, which is an antibiotic, but the problem is it wipes everything out. And then a lot of times what will happen is we'll get a regrowth of especially E. coli, which is always there, but overgrowth of that can create more inflammation in the gut. So the rebalancing and looking at it from what's called a terrain theory, looking at how everything works together synergistically. So just like what Billy was saying of, if we have an overgrowth of yeast, how do we outcompete it by creating more balance in the system is key. And that's how these probiotic supplements do it, because we're using such a broad spectrum, such diversity, and it's so concentrated, you don't need so much. And so it's really helping to reestablish balance. And I love that you gave the example. There's so many different ways to treat yeast overgrowth, and it doesn't mean one way is wrong or one way is right, but you still, at the end of the day, have to create balance in that microbiome, or else it will return. That's where a lot
Yeah.
of people get stuck. So especially if you are using the starve out approach, like this is why, they down the road they add back in maybe some carbohydrates, and then wham, like we're back to itchy paws and itchy ears. So that's why we have to reestablish balance. And I love that you guys have created this product, because it's an easy way to help do that. Um, you know, So it's I think for a lot of people there's so much fear around fermented foods and for hearing like about yeast. Yeast is going to contribute to the overgrowth. So I think you explained that really well for people. Is there anything else that you
Um,
feel like you should add on that?
yeah, number one, so there was an interesting study that came out recently for humans in with kombucha, which showed that basically like the microbes that you get from kombucha generally, essentially are like fasting microbes and actually help metabolism. And so I think this could work in correlation too with helping dogs with a lower metabolism, maybe that are trying to lose weight, that kind of thing. Oh, there was something else that I wanted to mention. I'm sure it'll come to me at some point. But so I think that just like that, like we're saying right now, like this is going to be great for yeast issues, but it's also just generally applicable, right? Because all of those bacteria, all those probiotics, all those yeast are going to be healthy for other things as well. Um, and not just, and that's where the rotation could come into this and could come
Mm.
into play, to be able to do that. So,
What's your recommendation for like rotating? So let's start with like a healthy pet, right? If someone wants to use these products, like, and obviously there's no steady fast rules, right? We know that there can be flexibility. It doesn't have to be exactly this or that. But just for general recommendations for a healthy pet, how would you rotate the three? Like, how long would you use one before going to the next one?
I think there's two ends of the spectrum here, and I think most people are on the same end of the spectrum that I am with like food with anything. When I feed my dog, I primarily feed our bison, beef, and goat. And I just use a bag of bison, and when that's gone, I move to
Mm.
beef. And that's how I roll with it. I do the same thing with the blends. In fact, today I'm going to get the Vitality blend. I'm very excited about that. Just throwing that out there. But I just move through it. I think that's the easiest thing for most people. But then some people will email me and they'll be like, "Can I switch every day? Can I?" You can. You
Mm.
could do that. It just depends on what you want to do. So I would recommend to people that that's if you're not, targeting a specific health issue, specific life stage, I would just rotate between the three. And then you can either do that the easy way, like I laid out, or you could buy all three and then just do whichever you want to do on any day. And again, they also can be used with our other products. Like I know for sure I'll be using this with the mushroom probiotic, and obviously I use our blends every day and all that, but I just mean like with our other probiotic products,
Mm.
you could rotate that, right? You could do soil, then you could do, Bam's beets, then you could do leaf, then you can kind of do it really because it's all just food, so you can kind of do it however you want.
Okay, so just a question popped into my head that I think may come up for people. If they're already using a probiotic supplement, would they continue using that probiotic supplement alongside yours? So a lot of times people are using like, for example, S. boulardii for diarrhea. Would they continue that or would they just transition over to one of these? Maybe use like the soil-based.
Um, so uh
There might not be a specific answer for it,
No,
but
no. So the
people be using
Aspulardi
all
is
of
just a
these.
specifically interesting one because Aspulardi actually like helps all of the good bacteria. So it's
Mhm.
not going to compete against it necessarily. It will help. So like there have been times with my own dog, and I have recommended to people that even if they're doing other probiotics, that they use Aspulardi just to support those probiotics in the gut. So with that specifically, I think you could use them in conjunction together really well.
Mm.
With the other stuff, it would just again depend. I think if you're using another product that you really love, you could rotate. You could rotate between brand X and soil and then go to the next thing or however you want to do that. Or it really just depends on your dog because again, I've said from the very beginning when we started releasing like Lewis Fermented Golden Paste, Bam's Beats, the Wild Fermented Mushroom Probiotic, that these are bases for diversity. And then if you like other probiotics, you can rotate those in on top whenever you want to. And so honestly, I really think you could say you're using soil to get that base of diversity. and then you're like, oh, I like this probiotic and I want to use it sometimes. I don't think you have to stop using soil. I think you could use that as well. If you feed, that's one of your like 19 black cats just went across the camera.
I
So
don't have 19 yet. Only
no.
she's the spooky one. So I hope people enjoyed that. She didn't knock over all the things, but there we are. So
Um, just a quick side note. I don't know if you know about a camera thing like that. I don't know if you know Dr. Brendan of Raw Pet Medics. I was in a panel with him like this once, and he was outside, and his background fell on him, and he thought nobody noticed. And like 10 minutes later, I was like, I noticed. I noticed that, and I will never forget. So,
I mean, it's part of life, right? This is real life. It's just what happens. You know, one of my
exactly.
cats got caught in the curtain before, so it's all good. Like,
Uh, and a couple things on the layering probiotics. I think that's where these kind of go back to the food therapy idea. Like this is just food at the end of the day. We're taking the probiotic strains from the food. So if there's a probiotic product that has certain strains that are targeting something you're doing, I think you definitely could layer them on top and get that great diversity from these and they get the targeted thing you're looking from the other product. Another thought I had in terms of rotation, Billy, is every time we produce these probiotics, like you mentioned, they're going to grow out differently. So you're going to have variation within the same probiotic. So if you feed soil exclusively, every bottle is going to be a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
So you have
Yeah,
that
that's a very good
efficiencies.
point. That's a very good point. It's
yeah.
like you don't have to go through, it's like the most convenient way to actually get that. You don't even have to rotate products because it'll kind of rotate within itself. And that same thing is true of our frozen products as well. And the other part, I'll just throw out there is one of the things I love about Green Juju is like our favorite customer and favorite person that we love to bring on is someone who's never done anything with food-based and whole food stuff. So like if you go to our products, if someone who's just fed a processed kibble diet their entire life starts using our veggie blends, that's a really big deal. And just getting that one person. Like we obviously love the people who are just crazy about nutrition, like me and etc. But I just really love that. And so I feel like there's a segment of the population that just doesn't do any frozen. That it's just not their thing. And they're just gonna miss out on what we know animals need, which is fresh foods, unprocessed foods, variety. And so what I love about this is like this can sit in your cupboard for 24 months. Like we recommend refrigeration, but you don't have to do that. And so I think this is going to go a long way to helping animals that we just wouldn't have the opportunity to help otherwise. Because I know I have family members who are, it's exactly the case. So
Yeah. I think that's such an important reminder because I think a lot of people get so overwhelmed with, I have to feed raw, raw is the only way to do it. And it's just not the truth. Like there's so many great studies that show just adding like superfood toppers. And once again, you guys have made it easy to just like open it up, scoop some onto like kibble if you're feeding kibble, and you're going to get increased phytonutrients, antioxidants. I mean, Kelley, you mentioned what you saw with Bailey, just changing like that simple, just adding the juice to Bailey's diet. And, I saw it with my own dog, Finn, when we transitioned from kibble to fresh food with him. He's so different and he enjoyed his food more. So I think that's really important. Small changes do add up. And I think we discount them and we have different camps in nutrition, right? Extremes. And it doesn't have to be extreme. It can just be the magic's in the middle and keep it simple and know that we're all doing the best that we can for our pets. And any little thing that you can do or add on like this will make a big difference to their overall health. So I think that's a great reminder for that because we complicate things. And, you can go all in or you can do a little and that's okay. And I think we need to meet people where they're at so that we can help more animals versus saying you have to do it this way and that's the only way. So,
Could not agree more. I think for 10 years of this company, we didn't have a complete and balanced food, and everything we had was toppers and treats and supplements. And because in my past dog walker life. I know how overwhelming it is to be approached and to approach people with that conversation of nutrition. People are like, whoa, I have to overhaul everything. And it kind of just shuts down there. But if you can baby step it and be like, try this. And then they see a difference. And it's like,
Mhm.
whoa, I just changed something. And then you get curious. Maybe you want to change something more. But it never has to be all or nothing. And feeding your pet should be something that you love and enjoy because they feel that energy from you feeding them. And if it becomes overwhelming, it's gone too
Yeah.
far. So that's another reason we love these, is because no matter what you're feeding or where you are, how much time you have, like it can be done easily.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
and I think too the camps thing is interesting because I know for me personally, I have people, say friends, outside the industry who just don't care about pet food at all. Like they're like, "What do you do again?" Like, really good friends and family and all that. And but they'll just randomly tell me that they know I work in pet food to be like, "Oh, hey, I started adding sweet potato to the dog's diet." And the only thing I ever say is, "That's amazing." I'm not like, actually, well, you should start. Yeah, I just go, that is so cool. I'm sure that they love it. And I just leave it at that. And I think if there was more of that, it would be awesome. So,
Yeah, it would change a lot of things. And also too, I think for as a veterinarian and looking at my veterinary colleagues who are potentially terrified of this way, right? Like with feeding raw, fresh food, unbalanced diets, creating more harm. It's a nice stepping stone for them to also say like, human food isn't bad, but here's an opportunity to incorporate this, and you're not unbalancing the diet, and then they can see the changes in their patients. And I think it's really important too for everyone listening as a pet parent. Like if you do make these changes, share what you're doing with your veterinarian. Because I didn't know about this stuff. I just wasn't taught it in vet school. All my knowledge that I have now came from learning outside of like the veterinary program. And we are all in this together to plant those seeds to show what is capable and what can also be easy. It doesn't have to be hard, like we're saying, but we have to share the results with our veterinarians. I don't, people are afraid because of, the lashback or pushback. But at the end of the day, adding in Bailey's blends, or I started using this, whole food probiotic, and my pet's coat is amazing. They may not believe you, and that's okay. You don't have to make them change their opinion about stuff, but share it because you're planting a seed and it's going to help encourage them to get curious to then learn more. And I think that's really, really important. So if you're seeing changes with your pet, share that at like their annual wellness. Like, hey, I added this in, it made a huge difference. It's the only thing I changed. And, so I think that's really important also because I work with so many pet parents that are just afraid to bring it up because of potential lashback over like, oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to feed human food or, these things. My vet didn't recommend this. I'm going against like what they're recommending. And these are all very safe products. And if you have a sensitive pet, going slow and starting with small amounts and just experimenting to see how your pet responds is always what I encourage to with my clients. And I say you guys would agree with these products too, just starting with small amounts and see what your pet does and then build up from there. But the nice thing is the versatility and the flexibility with these products is that you can play around with it and do what feels best for you and see what happens with your pet with it.
um, yeah, I will tell you one funny thing. One time most of the time I'm like, oh yeah, it's fine, it's fine. But one time my parents were visiting and I was feeding Lua at the time. And I was getting the food ready. My dad was like hovering over my shoulder and he's like, I don't think you're doing enough food there. And I was like, I think I got it. I think I have this one figured out. I don't know, maybe.
Could I ask one more question that might help for info later?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Billy, can you tell us what is the difference between our mushroom probiotic
Mhm.
supplement and these probiotics? How are they different probiotics?
So beyond the obvious metric, which is that uh the the mushroom probiotic is frozen. It's the brine of fermented mushrooms. So essentially, you are getting the wild fermentation. So you're getting those probiotics based on the soil the mushrooms were grown in, the mushrooms themselves, right? All these different factors. And so you are getting that hundreds of species from those mushrooms, which you're also getting the mushroom benefit because essentially instead of doing like a more fancy extraction method, what we're doing is just letting those bacteria eat the mushrooms and then leaching the nutrients into the liquid. So there, though, you are eating a fermented food, right? There is fermentation. It is strictly a fermented food. You have that basically the pH level in that is going to be right around, honestly, like as low as 3. And so that's a for like fermented food with a capital F, right? So there's a lot of animals that can do great with that, but there's some, as we've mentioned, that have sensitivities. Um, but also you're going to get even say than soil, you're just going to get a different speciation of probiotics because it's different in mushrooms than it is in, Bam's beets or whatever it might be. So so there you're getting something that is the actual, say, food itself. Wherein with these probiotics, you are getting that same level of speciation or that same diversity of probiotics, but without any of the residual food. And so if going back to all of those different circumstances, when to use the powder versus not using the powder, it goes back to sensitivity, it goes back to energy, it goes back to so great example of that, just on the energy thing is I my dog throughout his whole life, obviously, has needed warming foods. Like he is the most cool dog. He's always under blankets. He's burrowing between your legs. He's just constantly in a state of warming himself. Like he has a donut bed that has a cover on top and he's just under it like all the time. So I know that when I use neutral to warming proteins, venison broth, all these things, I've seen really great results with that, just generally, especially in the past like month or two. And so I know that I don't have to worry about any of that when I'm using these products. So it doesn't, and I would say honestly, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not the person when it comes to energy stuff. But I would say most animals uh, need cooling proteins, etc. And so a lot of the things that we're using and fermentation is a warming process. And so I think it would be great for those because again, you don't have to worry about those things.
Mm.
Um, and obviously it's shelf stable and easier to use. And it's also I think going to be the powdered ones are going to be we've had good palatability with cats just generally, but one of the reasons our milk, for example, has gone over so well with cats is because it's not fermented. It's just straight up milk, so there's not as much of like a flavor to it. And so I think the powder is going to go really well with cats because it's basically tasteless and flavorless. It tastes like slightly sweet. Um,
Which they like. So,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So I think that will be a big thing. And for cat people, I would strongly urge if your cat is 100% inside to diversify the gut as much as you possibly can. So even using soil as your base and then rotating through the other two would be really cool.
Yeah, definitely. One of the final questions I did want to ask because I could see a question coming from my community or clients is can you use it alongside an antibiotic? So I know with like soil-based probiotics and your beneficial yeast, the Saccharomyces boulardii, it's not usually impacted and it can help mitigate damage when you have to use an antibiotic. So would you use like soil alongside an antibiotic if an antibiotic is needed?
I would use I would use a combination of so I would use soil to get the probiotic benefit of that. And then I would also use
Like,
either farm or leaf because
okay.
we grew out the beneficial yeast.
Yeah,
Um, and so those we know are not affected either.
yeah,
And so honestly, even when people reach out to me like friends and stuff, and they're like, "Hey, my dog's on a antibiotic. What should I do? I tell them Saccharomyces boulardii, but this is a better option, I feel like. And honestly, you could do all three if you really wanted to, right? Like you
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
do Saccharomyces boulardii and these, but I would do soil as a baseline, and then I would do the one of the other two. And the other thing too is because these kind of like if you have a really problem animal and you're dealing with different bouts of antibiotics and things like that, keep in mind the 24 months that we put on our packaging is room temperature. It'll actually last longer when it comes to in the fridge. So you could just kind of keep leaf in there in case you have an issue or whatever it might be. Um, and kind of have it in your toolbox for like, in case of emergency or something like that.
Awesome. No, that sounds great. Now, just to finish up, what is the one thing that you want to leave pet parents with? And Billy, we'll go to you and then we'll go to Kelley that you want them to just know about like the new probiotics. Could be anything.
My thing is don't complicate it. You can use these products however you want and it will help your animal. So we don't have to worry about whether it's the probiotics, whether it's our blends or our food. Just make positive changes and you don't have to, we don't always have to go down to the nitty-gritty details of every, specific nutrient, etc. Just do the best you can. And I think that these new probiotics are going to help people be able to do that. And that's our hope. That's why we do what we do.
Awesome. Perfect. Kelley.
So my thing is actually something I really want Billy to talk about. Um, can you succinctly talk about the importance of bringing the outside in and how all three of these will benefit every pet in that way, and how even dogs that are getting out on lots of walks every day don't have really an outdoor life, and how nothing else can really bring this in the way this is?
So, yeah, I mean, when we look at the four longest lived dogs in recorded history, the commonality between them was dirt and the environment, right? They were all sleeping outside, they were all in rural communities or on farms, they're all constantly in nature's microbiome, right? And we've taken our dogs and cats out of that, and that is their evolutionary uh, microbiome. And in the wild, they constantly get inoculated with those soil microbes, with all of those different bacteria sets. And so, even if you go out to the woods, once a week, even if most of us don't live on farms, even if so my dog is a great example of that. I live in the city, he walks in the city, and he doesn't get out very often on hikes and things like that. And so all of our dogs and cats to some degree are missing that evolutionary exposure is a good word for it. And so this is a way to actually bring that into a pet's bowl. And I feel like that's been a big focus for us at Green Juju is how do we bring that, which I think is honestly one of the most overlooked key foundational parts of health. How do we bring that into the bowl? And so that's really the purpose of all of these probiotics is how do we get hundreds to thousands of different species of bacteria on a differing basis so we can mimic nature, because then it doesn't matter what we all have different constraints when it comes to budget, time, all those things. If we start with this and we start with the gut and we start with bringing nature back into the bowl, then whatever we're doing is your dog or cat is going to benefit from that.
Hmm. I think it's very well said, and also too a reminder that even if people are going out into nature, nature's changed. There's so much chemicals and
Mhm.
sprays and stressors and toxins, and so we do need to support our pets. So even a healthy pet needs support. And then also too, our pets are getting vaccines and flea and tick preventatives and you know, antibiotics. A lot of times they've had a course of antibiotics at some point. So there can be lasting effects. I'm not saying not to use those things. That's a different conversation. However, when we look at what our pets are coming into contact with, there's a lot of factors that impact their overall health. And so being able to support them very gently but very, very effectively with products like this can make a huge difference, just like Billy mentioned and Kelley has mentioned too. So You know, I hear it all the time. My pet's healthy, they're normal, they're fine, they don't need anything. But we unfortunately live in a stressful world, coming from a lot of different areas. And so supporting them will help keep them in that state. Really, it's that proactive approach to health. It's really key. And it doesn't have to be 17 supplements. It can be just
Mhm.
like one thing. And that's what's really neat about these and how you've kind of changed the world of probiotics and the benefits that we can gain from it. So really, really appreciate that. Now, one final thing, because people are gonna be like, where do I get these? So I would love for either Kelley or Billy, where can people find these probiotics, Green Juju in general? Tell us about where they should go.
So you can find Green Juju products in general at your local independent pet store. We have a store locator on our website that's regularly updated. If you can also request your local pet store to bring it in for you. We do sell some products on our website. You're always going to get a better deal in the pet store because we charge shipping and they don't. The probiotics will be showing up in late April. And with all new product launches, it's always great to let your store know if you're looking for them so they know to order them for you. So yeah, they'll be showing up pretty soon here.
Awesome. Perfect. And for everyone who's listening to this maybe down the road, this was filmed in March 2025. So next month they're coming out, just so people are like, wait, what happened? So,
Yes.
but definitely too, I love that you brought up if your local pet food store does not carry these products, ask them to carry it. That's how we get more products accessible to people too. Perfect.
Stores
Well,
always going to sell what they know their customers want to buy.
And
exactly.
it's good to support your local economy and support those small independent shops, because they do great work for you. They vet the products and
Yes.
understand it so you don't have to. Um,
It's been a pleasure having both you, Kelley, and Billy sharing your amazing products, Green Juju. I know it's benefited so many people, and I think, one of the big reminders from just this talk is keep it simple and have fun with it. We don't want it to become a stressor. It shouldn't be stressful. Supporting our pets' health. And I know a lot of your products have made it so much easier for people to just start small and start implementing to really help support their dogs and their cats' health. So thank you for taking the time to share and to just be awesome humans and create an amazing product. I truly appreciate you. And I know my audience does and my clients do too. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much
thank
for
you.
having me.
Want to know exactly which probiotics actually support your pet's gut, not just mask symptoms? Make sure you grab our free probiotic guide for the pets in the link below. It's a must-have resource for every pet parent dealing with gut or skin issues. I hope you enjoy it.